Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where I'm keeping the momentum rolling on the Gruesome Gulch layout. This time out, I want to build the rickety wooden trestle that spans the gulch itself. If you've been following along on the Gruesome Gulch series from the beginning, thank you very much. You probably know that I used some microengineering Code 83 ON30 Flex Track for this layout. On a bridge, the ties are generally much closer together and much longer, usually about 10 feet long. And these ties are a scale 8 feet long. So obviously I need to replace the ties under the rails over the gulch there in order to have a bridge that looks somewhat realistic. So I designed and cut some little sections of ties. These are 6x6 ties because I cut this out of some 1/8 inch thick basswood, and I figured I could get about 12 ties on here before the grain started to be wonky. You know what I mean? You want the grain to be all going in the right direction on the ties. You don't want to cross grain on the ties because that wouldn't make any sense. And the curve where I want to put my bridge is a 10-inch radius, and that's really tight for ON30. So I need 1, 2, 3, 4 sections like this of 12 ties each to make that curve. But I need something else too. I need stringers underneath these ties to, basically tie the whole bridge together. As I'm sure a lot of you already know, in real life there is no such thing as a curved trestle, a real curved trestle, at least not that I'm aware of. They're actually made up of short sections of straight trestle that are stitched together to create the curve. So the rail curves, but the little bridge sections technically do not, because it's really hard to make a 6x12 curve like that if you're putting the stringers in. But with that in mind, we do cheat sometimes here at Thunder Mesa Studio, and we cheat on Gruesome Gulch. So I've decided that I'm going to build an actual curved trestle. This is a technique I have used before. If you remember when I built Geyser Gulch many moons ago, I did the same thing. Built an actual curved trestle like this, and no one has complained about that one yet. So let's go ahead and finish this up, get some stain on these pieces, and start putting it together. On the stringers, I've already gone in and carved a couple of vertical lines down on each side just to give the look of separate beams. Now I'm using my razor saw to accentuate the grain. Then I want to do the same thing basically on each of these ties. Then in addition to the grain, I just want to go back and add some more distress to some of these ties, maybe shorten some of them a little bit, maybe even break a couple. Break like that. I'm using my preferred India ink and 70% rubbing alcohol stain. So I've let all of these pieces dry completely overnight. And I don't know if this is something I've mentioned before. That's a really important thing to do when you have things that need to fit together properly. And that's because when you stain basswood like this, it really soaks up that stain like a sponge, and the pieces will actually expand a little bit. And for something like this, it will literally change the geometry. So you really need to let everything dry completely and shrink back to the shape it's supposed to be in before you start gluing things together. Just putting some glue on the back of this webbing between the ties. It should just follow right down the center of those stringers. Once again, model making, mostly waiting for things to dry. These sections got warped just a little bit from the stain, but clamping them down should flatten them out just fine. Now I'm putting the 4x4 guard timbers on, and these go in a scale foot back from the ends of these ties. But I'm also breaking them and making them look old and distressed too. I think that's looking sufficiently gnarly so far. Now I'm putting in some Grant Line nut bolt washer castings, and these are number 66 is the number on there. So I've got to drill a little hole for each one, put them in. One thing I want to do too is, like, see here where the board is missing? This is a neat detail you'll see on old construction that's broken down and worn away. The board will be gone, but the bolt is still there. Just like that. Dab a CA, and you go. And with the last of the nuts and bolts in place, I believe the bridge deck is ready to install. Now I am ready to remove the plastic ties from underneath this section of track. But before I do, I'm taking a little precaution to help keep the track engaged without the ties in there. I'm soldering on a couple of short pieces of rail to the tops, to the rail heads, so that they won't move around while I'm installing that bridge deck underneath. And then after I get the bridge deck installed underneath there, I can go ahead and unsolder those and get them off of there. Now I can carefully remove these plastic ties. You can just cut right through these cast-in spikes on one side and then just kind of pull it down from underneath like that. This stuff is Ducko cement, which you can pick up at any hardware store, just about. And I'm going to smear that on the bottom of these rails. Just a light coat. And that should really help to secure the rails to the bridge deck. I should be able to just slide this right up under here. I feel that grabbing. Good. Use some clothespins to hold that in place until the glue cures. Now I just want to leave that alone for a little while. Now comes the fun part, which is spiking the rails down. I'm using some micro-engineering small rail spikes. And this is a Xuron rail spiking tool. You can get these from Micromark. A couple other tools I'm using. This is a homemade little block that I put between the rails to keep them engaged at 16.5 millimeters. And this is a NMRA standards gauge for HO scale, so I can continually check and make sure that the track is engaged as I go, even though I've got my little bars soldered on there just to be safe. It never hurts to double check. I'm doing what I call lazy spiking, which is a spike on each side on every other tie. So there's a spike here, a spike there, a spike here, a spike there, all the way on down. The spike heads fit right into the T-jaws of these spiking pliers. Holds it firmly. And then you can just drive it in. Then when you get it down to about that point, you back off, and then you can push it down the rest of the way in with just the tip of the pliers. Makes it a lot easier if you go in at an angle. And I move my block down to the next set. Check the gauge. And on we go. It's also a really good idea to check that everything's engaged with a set of wheels or a car that you know is engaged. Clean up the rest of that solder. That's turned out pretty good. But now I want to build a couple of bridge abutments, one for each side here, and I think I want those to be stone. So back to the workbench. Now, this stuff is gold polyurethane carving foam. This was sold under the brand name of balsa foam for many, many years. It's become hard to find, unfortunately, but you can find equivalent polyurethane carving foam online, available from sellers like Amazon and Blick Art Materials. So, you know, if you're looking for some, that's a good place to start. I read some funny reviews of this stuff online. One of the only negatives was, oh, it makes such a big mess. It makes a big mess everywhere. It leaves little bits of foam everywhere and dust. And, well, folks, I got some bad news for you. Making is messy. You can quote me on that. I only need each of these abutments to be about 2 scale feet deep. So I'm just going to split this 1 inch thick piece right in half. You can cut this stuff with just about anything sharp and some things that are dull. I'm going to use my razor saw. You don't want to use a hot knife cutter on urethane foam. It's way too dense for that. You cut and shape it much more like wood than you do other foams. There we go. Sand that smooth. One of them only needs to come down about 4 scale feet, so make a cut there. Now I want to carve out a little notch in the top to accommodate the stringers. They'll sit right in there. Okay, after a little trial and error, got a pretty good fit. Now I just want to round these corners off a little bit. Now I can start carving the stones, and one of my favorite tools for carving this stuff is actually just a track nail and a pin vise. Works really well. I'm just going to go and do 1 row at a time, and this is going to be a random stone abutment, so it'll look like it was made out of local materials laying around nearby. That's a pretty good start, but now I want to go back and go over some of these stones with my hobby knife. Change the shapes a little bit because you don't want them to all have the same relief, coming out to the same plane, I guess. So carve some of them back. You can also add some little strata lines. I'm going to make this one into a skull because, it's Gruesome Gulch. Alright, I think that'll work. Now let's do the other one. Well, I'm covered in foam dust now, but I believe I've got my 2 bridge abutments finished, at least the carving part. See, on this one I had to do some custom work to get it to fit into the spot where it needs to go. Now I just want to get a nice coat of the scenic base color for Gruesome Gulch on here, and you may recall that's that pewter gray. This will be the beginning of their paint job and also help to cut down on the dust from this urethane foam. Now the idea is to go back with some different shades of gray and darker and lighter tones and pick out individual stones. Give it a little bit of variety. Make it look more realistic. You can even use some browns here and there. Just make sure it's mixed in with the gray, grayed down quite a bit. The idea, of course, here is that these abutments would be made from the same volcanic rock, the basalt and the ash that you find all around the rest of the Gruesome Gulch layout. And of course you can intermix all of these colors to get a lot of different variety. And variety is what it's all about. After that step, I want to go over everything with a thin wash of flat black. See how it soaks back in to the mortar lines? That's what you want. If you don't do this step, just go and pick out the stones like I did in the previous step, it can actually end up looking a little bit cartoony, which is not a look we necessarily want. And the final step to finish these off is going to be to dry brush just hit the tops of the stones. This is a mixture of granite gray and the pewter gray base color. That's really going to make it pop. See the difference between the dry brush one and the non-dry brush one. And then go back and just carefully hit the highlights with that granite gray, that light gray. Now those are ready to go on. And now I can glue these into place. Just a little bit of Eileen's tacky glue applied to the backs. I should hold that right there. Now I want to blend these edges in to the rockwork on the layout. And I'm going to use some very thick Sculptamold to do that in very small quantities. Sculptamold, if you're not familiar, is a plaster and cellulose product. It's available from the American Art Clay Company. You can usually find it for sale online at Blick Art Materials or from Amazon.com. I'm just going to blend this, kind of feather it together so it looks like the abutments were built in place and not just kind of slapped on there. A wet paintbrush is really handy for kind of feathering this out and blending things together. This all needs to dry now, and then I can paint it to match the rest of the scenery, naturally. But while I wait, I'll go ahead and get started on the trestle bents. I'm going to have 2 trestle bents, and they're both going to be a custom job, basically one here and one here, so back to the workbench we go. I've decided I want the trestle over the gulch to be a pile style trestle. And a pile trestle has round piers or piles that have been hammered down into the bedrock by a pile driver, as opposed to a square timber trestle, which uses just big old square timbers. And what I really need to expedite this whole process is a template or a jig. And I could draw a new one, but fortunately, I never throw anything away. Let's see. No. Nope. Aha! That's what we want, right there. This is pretty typical of the templates that I make. It's just did the drawing and laminated it onto some foam core, so it'll hold pins that'll hold the wood in place while I glue it together. It's got some clear packaging tape over the top so the parts won't stick. And I put some scrap lumber in here just to square everything up. I've already cut and stained all of the lumber I believe I'll need, and so I'll just start by laying this top sill in. We can build the bents underneath. Need to make 2 of them, as I mentioned. One of them is going to be a little bit different than the other. I made a new line down here to indicate the height of this trestle. I want this trestle to look extra spindly and scary, so using 8x8s or 8-inch rounds for the uprights rather than 12x12s, just to give it a spindlier look. And make sure I get the angle consistent on all of these angled pieces. I set it up on my disc sander. Now we got some 4x6 sway braces that go across like so. Now with the glue dry, I should be able to just carefully flip this over and add the sway brace on the other side. we go. The second trestle bent is going to be on a slope, so I took some careful measurements and added another kind of angled line right here so I know how long to make the legs. It doesn't have to be, you know, perfect, because I can fudge a little bit on the ground. I can add more ground cover, etc. But I want it to be as close as I can get it. And these last two I can just mark and cut to length. And then that is also going to change the length and the angle of these diagonal braces just a little bit. Make them a little shorter. And I flip it over, put the other brace on. Each of the bents gets 20 nut bolt washer castings, 10 on each side. I've already done this side, so you got to have them front and back. You got to have them where they go in and then where they come out on the other side for, you know, to be somewhat realistic. These are some Grant Line number 98 NBWs. This is a size 70 bit I'm using in my twist drill. I found when doing these NBWs, it's better to have the hole be a little bit big than a little bit small. I like to secure these in place with just a little dab of cyanoacrylate on the end, just like that. Alright, just need to do the 10 on the other side, and I've already finished this one, so get that done, and these will be ready to install under the trestle. I think I'll use some Eileen's tacky glue to install these. And smear some here on the bottom of the stringers, and then put a little dab on the bottom of each leg. Done a little bit of carving away of the landscape here just to make sure that these fit properly. I didn't have to do too much, thankfully. Now I want to backfill around the bottom of these bents a little bit more of my volcanic cinder ground cover. Just hold all that in place with some diluted white glue, a generous amount. Now the Sculptamold is dry too, so I can come back and paint it to match the rest of the rock work. A trestle like this might have some horizontal bracing. I want to make it look like it's fallen down. Broken piece right there. Help tell the story. Now the one on the other side be broken, but not quite fallen down yet. Got some other various boards and bits of debris that have fallen off as the trestle slowly falls apart over time. Now I can finish blending the abutments into the rest of the rock work with the same colors that I used to paint all of that to begin with. Now I'm back with my spiking pliers and rail spikes to add some guardrails. And the important thing is that the head of the rail be lower than the stock rail that you're using. So this is code 83 rail, so I'm using some code 70 here for the guardrails. And I've already painted it dark brown. And we got to continually check it with our standard gauge to make sure that the wheel flanges are going to clear. I'm basically just going to put enough spikes in this to hold it down. Don't need to go overboard. Okay. Let's see how we did. One of the final details I want to add is a refuge. And just like it sounds, a refuge is a spot on a trestle like this, little platform that you would run to if you saw a train coming, if you happen to be out on the bridge. Not a good place to be. This is also often where you would find fire barrels. But this particular refuge is going to be in somewhat poor repair. Not a place that you'd want to run to if the train was coming, if you know what I mean. So we've got some 6x6 ties coming out, and then some 1x12s. I'm going to split this one. Watch your step. As for the fire barrel, it's not in very good shape either. It's down here in the bottom of the gulch, half buried in debris, right where it fell. The last thing is, do a little bit of weathering with some chalks. Especially want to get some rust on these rails up here. Using some orange and some terracotta colors. Then I want to go right down the middle with some black. Represent soot and grime from the passing trains. And then just basically dirty things up quite a bit with some grayish browns. And just a light coat of matte fixative on here to keep that all in place. I'm just finishing up cleaning off the railhead, and as you can see, I couldn't resist adding a few more details down here in the gulch itself. I've got some weeds, I've got an old dead tree modeled from some sagebrush, some more debris here and there. But now I think it's time to run a train through here and see how it all looks. And that's going to be a wrap on the Gruesome Gulch Trestle. Of course, there are still 3 more bridges that need to be built back in Cadaver Caverns, and I'm going to be getting to that side of the layout very soon in some upcoming videos, so please stay tuned for that. Until then, I want to thank everyone who continues to support this channel by liking and subscribing and sharing and hitting that notification bell. Don't forget you can also follow Thunder Mesa over on Instagram at thunder.mesa, and you can see all that's new on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. And if you really like what we're doing here on the channel and would like to show your support, you can head on over to patreon.com/thundermesa, like these nice folks did, and you can show your support there. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Adios for now.